Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Tim. Okay, so it's 2 p.m. Today, and we'll kick off our Secure Webinar 18. So hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you may be. Welcome to the 18th edition of the Secure Webinar series. This webinar is titled Blueprints to Breakthroughs, Enhancing Vaccine Manufacturing Ecosystems in Developing Member Countries. We refer to that from the ADB perspective. We're thrilled to have you join us today as we explore our innovative approaches and strategies and practices in relation to strengthening health security and in particular the vaccine ecosystem in countries. I'm Brian Riley. I'm a health specialist based in Manila at the ADB, and I'll be your moderator for today's discussion. We've got fantastic panelists, a full complement, and I'll introduce panelists prior to their interventions and presentations. So today's agenda will be a 90-minute session that will cover the Asian Development Bank's initiatives and how it's supporting domestic vaccine production, regulatory strengthening, and also the strengthening of the clinical trials ecosystems. We'll explore some insights and case studies, including from Bangladesh, Pakistan, the Philippines, and Vietnam, and other countries. And we'll touch on some of the international partnerships and collaborations that we have or are in process to sort of enhance vaccine production capacities. We'll be talking about resilient vaccine ecosystems. We'll be talking about some of the regulatory strengthening successes and challenges and barriers, and leveraging our partnerships to, ensure stronger technology transfer and capacity building. So we're honoured to have an illustrious panel, and that's it from the welcome and introductions perspective. But can I welcome to the floor, please, newly appointed Director Health at ADB, no stranger to everybody at Secure, Dr. Eduardo Banzon, Director of the Health Practice Team now in Manila and for the ADB. Dr. Dodo, over to you. I'll pull your presentation up. Thanks. Just a second.
Thanks a lot, Brian, and hello from Manila. Sorry, I'm in Delhi right now. So I think, first of all, again, welcome. But I think one of the points we need to understand is the context of why we're having these discussions. The pandemic, I think, but the pandemic basically showed what we can say, the vaccine ecosystem prior to the pandemic did not work. Our challenge was that when the pandemic happened, can we have the next slide? A lot of the vaccine inequity that was already happening, in a sense, at that point, we have concerns about, let's say, some of the more modern vaccines, the newer vaccines, and the ways and how some of the vaccines that are now, for example, becoming multi-antigen were not being available in developing countries. This became much worse. And even the UN basically said that vaccine inequity became a moral failure over times. So in the pandemic, what we saw, what countries were having problems in supply, those problems in vaccine availability of vaccines, in how they can be distributed to developing countries. We saw problems on, let's call this vaccine nationalism. So in a sense, now this has made a lot of countries talk about, so how can we make sure this will not happen again in the next pandemic? Next slide. So at this point, when we go around a lot of our developing member countries in ADB, they talk about, we want to manufacture our own vaccines. And that's a message we keep on hearing, whether we're talking about large population countries or small population countries. They also talk, of course, and ask for our support for improving vaccine supply and logistics. But this clamor from DMCs that they want to have their vaccine, to manufacture their own vaccine, is a very strong clamor. And as I said, this was really something that got highlighted because of what happened in the pandemic. When we hear that, we always tell them, no, this is not something you just go in. Can we go back to the slides again?
Sorry.
On your own. This is not something that just happens overnight, right? We need to look into this, look into studies. We need to see whether you have the market. We don't want countries to manufacture vaccines and end up having white elephant manufacturing plants, or the quality will not be good. We want to make sure that and these white elephants will happen if you don't have the workforce. We want to make sure that you've addressed concerns like intellectual protection, because vaccine manufacturing doesn't necessarily mean you develop your own vaccine. It could also mean manufacturing vaccines that are already been developed by others. More crucially, the vaccine has to be trusted. So you need to comply with the WHO maturity level. The regulatory, your regulatory agency should be able to comply. We do not see, in a sense, it's dangerous to have vaccines being manufactured when you cannot assure the quality and safety, because you're putting people at risk. We need to understand, can we actually do this in a matter where some countries will do it, some countries will buying? That means, can instead of just as country by country having that, you could actually like a regional approach in doing that, like in ASEAN and all that. And we need to identify other factors. So this is, in a sense, the environment that EDB has been working on as we work in supporting and responding to the demand of our countries. Next slide, please. So what have we done? We have, of course, made sure that our countries have the knowledge, have the understanding of what's happening, and we've been providing technical support to countries that have asked for support, whether from the Pacific all the way to Central Asia. We have provided the necessary technical assistance. We have convened meetings. We have helped train, and that will be discussed later by Dinesh. And in the case of Bangladesh, we have actually provided investment. We have provided a loan to support them to build not just their manufacturing but also their regulatory capacity. And we need to have partnerships, because this is not something ADB can do in its own. So within this context, that of ADB responding to the clamor of our developing member countries and helping them that this response should be done in the right way. Let us listen now to the presentations of our I think, a wonderful set of experts that we'll be listening to in the next hour and a half. So over to you, Brian. Brian.
Cool. Thanks, Dodo, for that. Moving between screens on our moderation process, but thanks for that wonderful presentation and your insights. So, for the next presentation, let me please introduce Dr. Dinesh Arora, the Principal Health Specialist at ADB. Dr. Arora is a seasoned health expert with many years, I won't say how many decades, of practice in public health in India, but also in the Middle East, South Asia, North Africa, and globally. Dr. Dinesh leads the vaccine team's work at ADB and will provide us an overview and presentation on AD's initiatives to support vaccine manufacturing. I'll be sharing the screen for you, Dr. Dinesh, so please hold a second. I'll pop it on there.
Thank you, Brian. I'm not sure about the decades thing, but years would have been much better. Anyways, thanks, Dodo, for setting the context. Let me start by saying that, well, ADB is a new entrant in the health. So why did Bangladesh entrust ADB with vaccine manufacturing project? That was something which I just thought we will start with. Can we go first, Brian, if that's right? Right. So let's understand what happened during COVID. During COVID, as Dodo was saying, and I was at that time in South Asia. Let me give an example from Bangladesh. Bangladesh had written contracts from one of the leading institutes in India, vaccine manufacturing, but they will not be able to supply because of what I think Dodo mentioned very rightly, the vaccine nationalism. They were not allowed to export vaccines outside. So even written contracts were not honored. So that meant that countries were struggling to get vaccines. There was not only hoarding of vaccines from the Western world, but also wherever those who had manufacturing abilities could provide vaccines more to their own countries. So at that time, ADB formed a called Regional Vaccine Advisory Group, which was actually to understand how vaccines could be procured and supported to different countries. We had examples where we had the finances ready, we had the vaccines ready, but the regulatory system was not there to support, and ADB could not purchase those vaccines. This is the context where ADB put together some of the stringent regulatory authorities with WHO and the leading ML3, ML4 at that time, now we move to WLA, agencies who were available within Asia Pacific. So the Regional Vaccine Advisory Group was formed, headed by TGA Australia, co-chaired by Indonesia and India, and of course had members from European Commission, had members from WHO to support regional vaccine authorities. One example, you can go to the next slide, Brian. One example I like to give here, and I'm giving you as a project officer example. We were supplying vaccines, Sinopharm, to Sri Lanka. Now, Sri Lanka purchased multi-dose vials and wanted ADB to finance this. Our view was that only single-dose vaccines have been WHO EUL listing that WHO has cleared from a particular contracting manufacturing. So multi-dose vials, we need to wait. Now, Sri Lanka will say, hey, what's the difference between single dose and multi-dose? It's just that it's more economical. We are saving carbon footprint and it can be faster. So why ADB is saying that multi-dose vials are different from single dose vials? And when we wrote a letter to them, they sent back a letter saying that, you are not experts in this. We want expert guidance on this. This is where we went back to RVAG. I remember TGA Australia conducting a session on the same, on single dose, multi-dose vials, and clarifying that multi-dose vials use different adjuvant, preservative, and needs to be separately listed and cleared by WHO before it can be supplied to the different countries. In fact, we also roped in WHO there, who also clarified that multi-dose vials are under scrutiny by WHO, and soon we will have the results out. 2 months down the lane, they were approved. We lost 2 months in between. That was a message here, that we needed to be more agile, which we were not. So as a result, COVID did expose the fault lines in vaccine supply chain, in vaccine regulatory approvals, in vaccines manufacturing, not only about therapeutics and diagnostics, which was already exposed there. This is where, after what ADB had done with its COVAX policies, its policies on vaccine manufacturing and supplying vaccines procurement to different countries as part of what we had APVAX, Asia Pacific Vaccine Facility, which was for 9 billion. There was a lot of confidence enthused in what ADB had done. Can you go to the next slide? And at that time, they asked us to come up with the vaccines. So now we are moving towards remodeling the RVAG to advanced network, which will be for diagnostics, vaccines, and therapeutics. I have two of my illustrious colleagues on the call, Ben, who was the institutional memory for RVAG, and now supporting Jay on advanced, which we call as Asia Diagnostic Vaccines Network, Therapeutics Network, to counter epidemics and other disease outbreaks. I have no suspicion that this name is again given by Dodo, who is master in giving some excellent acronyms here. But the idea here is to come for a regulatory capacity building. That means how different regulators can share information, can upgrade themselves, can have best practices learned, but not limited to regulators, which was only RVAG, but moving towards more also with government agencies, which actually which have control over many regulators, the manufacturer and the industry partners, including clinical trial organizations, academics, and international organization. And we're not talking here only about vaccines, but also therapeutics, diagnostics, and also how do we leverage digital technologies to ensure that whenever the next pandemic hits, we are better prepared. Now, let me go to the next example of Bangladesh. Why Bangladesh chose for vaccines? And I think Dodo made a very specific point. We do not want white elephants in the room, right? And this experience is from the Ebola, where in Africa, many countries started manufacturing and then they did not know what to do because there was no demand for this. So let's go to the next slide and see what was there which made Bangladesh move towards vaccine manufacturing and ADB supporting it. This is the same template which Dodo showed initially, that what could be a pre-feasibility study for the same. Now, for vaccine manufacturing, you just can't say that we will export it to the world like what India or China are doing right now, and then we are manufacturing. No. Any export will require at least 10 years of consistent performance by a manufacturer, validated by WHO and trusted by CEPI and other organizations and Gavi. So it has to start first inward looking. Is there enough demand within the country to manufacture vaccines which can be used internally? Yes, Bangladesh crossed that. They had 3 million births cohort every year. BCG came up with the African model study, and the idea was about 1.5 to 2 million cohort per year is minimum for childhood vaccination to sustain any fill and finish vaccination. So Bangladesh crossed that market size potential. In addition, Bangladesh is transitioning out of Gavi subsidy. It was initially 2026, but they got 3 years more. So 2029, they will be transitioning out. Every year, they spend roughly about 90 to 100 million, even with the subsidy, for vaccines. So that's basically they're spending their foreign exchange. Imagine after the transition out of Gavi subsidy, our preliminary studies were they will be spending about 250 every year for vaccines if they purchase even at the UNICEF or the PAHO rates. So it's a huge economic and market case for Bangladesh to invest. Do they have the regulatory environment? No. For vaccination minimum ML3 to issue lot release and to have regulatory harmonization, they are still at ML2, but we are supporting them to move towards ML3. Pharmacovigilance to be strengthened. One of the prerequisites for any regulatory ML3 is a Drugs and Cosmetics Act, which was passed last year by Bangladesh. So it became a strong contender for WHO to do its assessment and give them ML3 status. Skilled workforce, yes. They have workforce for manufacturing steriles, IV antibiotics, but not for vaccine in the public sector, but they have in the private sector. Like we have companies like Vaccinco, Square, which actually are producing some of the vaccines not part of the childhood vaccination, like the snake venoms, cholera, rabies. So there is some ecosystem, but needs to be developed. As I already mentioned, the lessons from COVID came very strong. Along with this came the resolution to have self-reliance and regional cooperation. So one issue which Bangladesh faced was that if India can do, China can do, why not Bangladesh can do, at least for its own population, and then in next 5 to 10 years, even think of exporting to the Middle East, to other parts of the world. They also came up with the IP protection law, which was passed in 2022. They had a good vaccine manufacturing unit, good pharmaceutical manufacturing unit in Gopalganj. The Gopalganj was on the highway near the port, had access to raw materials, scientific human power. Is just 2.5 hours drive from Bangladesh, had 7 to 8 acres of land which could be used. So an ideal location for vaccine manufacturing to come up. So this is where ADB did a feasibility study in 2022, shared it with, and by 2023, we went forward for a project. Can you go next slide? This is something which I wanted to say about the regional regulation. Now, I'm not going to get detail into this, but yes, regulation is very, very, very important. In fact, one of the biggest learning from COVID for me as a health expert for ADB was, have we invested enough in regulation? Are our regulators strong enough to assess the diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines produced are safe enough for the world? And this is where the 5 steps of vaccination of regulation were put into place. I think I can see Ragini and Varun also, who had also helped us along with Syed and Saran from Tech Invention to understand where we are on the regulatory ecosystem. So the message here was Bangladesh needs to strengthen regulatory. So while we are focusing on vaccine manufacturing, let's not forget the regulation portion. Can you go to the next slide, Brian? So this was the whole project for the Bangladesh vaccine manufacturing, with the first output was on manufacturing facility. Second, for the first one was just manufacturing, like the setting up the turnkey. Second was making it functional, and third, regulation. So it came up with a 336.47 million ADB financing. We're also now progressing 2 million TA, which will be part of the revitalized TA for Bangladesh. In the meantime, we are supporting it through our existing TA 9950. Just to mention that, climate financing was roughly 10%. I should acknowledge here why it is 10% and not 30% or 40%, because the vaccine manufacturing units are highly, highly regulated. So even if we want to do something innovative, we need permission from WHO to go beyond GMP, which they normally do not give because it's very standardized. So there was limited scope, but whatever we could do, we have included that, though more learnings are coming as more evidence-based studies are coming out for vaccines and supply chain manufacturing. Can you go next slide, please? So the idea here is by 2027 to come up with a turnkey arrangement of design, build, and commissioning of the manufacturing facility. By 29, starting fill and finish vaccines as it graduates out of the Gavi subsidy, and few vaccines by 2030 indigenously, including the raw material also. And we are targeting 3 of them: the pneumococcal, meningococcal, and typhoid conjugate vaccines, which are costly, high cost, and require more indigenous, more country-specific trials to be achieved. Next slide, please. I will leave the slides with you. There are some of the innovations which we have done for climate and sustainability, including which syringes should be used, how packing should be done, and how biosafety level training, certification, and building restructure can be done. Can you go please next? Similarly, based on this, we had a seminar at CORE. I think CORE was also involved. CORE, in fact, is also involved with us on the Bangladesh project. And then we had Indonesian regulators also on that forum and speaking for how ADB could assist it. Can you go next slide? We had our colleague Jay, who leads our work on this. So we came out with 10 proposed activities on short-term, mid-term, and long-term of what could be achieved through BPOM. And presently, the CORE NUS is working on the 2 short-term ones, benchmarking to HSS Singapore and Korean FTA, which are all WLA listed, ML4, the highest level which we can be achieved on the WHO listing for regulations. And of course, other trainings are going on as of now. Can you go next slide, please? So the idea here is to support BPOM with perhaps a 400 million financing this year or the 2025 or 26 as it comes through for different 6 angles, including physical infrastructure. They want to come up with a hub and spoke model of regulatory labs across the country and supporting them on infrastructure, on human resources, clinical trial, and also their business regulatory approach. Can you go next, please? So the third country is Pakistan. And next is, so we are in the stage of conducting a pre-feasibility study for them. In fact, when the Bangladesh project was presented to the board, the AED from Pakistan was very keen to understand, is Pakistan also a fit case for this? And prima facie, it seems to be. Their birth cohort is 6.5 million, roughly double of Bangladesh. They do not have much vaccine manufacturing as of now. They're primarily dependent on Gavi. They will be transitioning out of Gavi in 2032. That means they have about 7 and 8 years to plan how they want to figure it out once they're out of Gavi. And it's a very fit case for them also to come out with vaccine manufacturing strategy. At the same time, their regulator is also maturity level 2. That means their regulator will also need strengthening, something similar to what Bangladesh is doing, initially focusing within what is required, and then they move out. So that's being discussed here. Can you go next, please? To support all this, we have again a TA to support the vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics in Asia Pacific, in addition to the pandemic preparedness 9950. Can you go ahead? So this is the 3 outputs, and the 3 countries are the one we have just discussed: Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Pakistan. I'm supporting Jay on this, and Jay is also on the call here. So roads to strengthen the regulatory ecosystems, also the post-market, and also the VTD manufacturing. Full life cycle of VTDs, right from clinical trials to marketing to strengthening of the regulatory system, is envisaged as part of our efforts to mainstream vaccine and manufacturing, as well as strengthening the regulatory ecosystems. Can we go next if there is anything else? We also had, during the COVID and post-COVID, the new technology of mRNA coming up. So we trained 90 people in close coordination with Government of Korea and the Yonsei University and Korea National Institution for Bioprocessing and Training on how we can have more know-how among our developing member countries and their staff on the newer technologies like the mRNA technology. This was an 8-week intensive course in Incheon and very well received and very well ranked out of them. I think at the World Bio Summit, Jay is here. Maybe if he will like to come in, or when he comes in, on to speak of what we are trying to set up an alum group with them at the World Bio Summit. Can you go next? And this also had not only the government, but also the private entrepreneurs included as part of the training. I'll stop here. These are some of the key elements which we are supporting in 3 major countries, partnering with Korea and partnering with other institutions as we move forward. We also have potential discussions at Vietnam and Philippines, and I think we can discuss as we move towards the panel on the same. But thank you so much for this opportunity, and back to you, Brian.
Wonderful. Thanks, Dinesh. Informative as always. And just to remind participants, we'll be getting all of the slides and content, the presentations out to you. But thanks again, Dr. Dodo, Dinesh. Now, if we move, and we're making fantastic time on our agenda, a few minutes ahead, let's see if we can keep that to allow more time for Q&A at the end. But next, we have some special guests, Dr. Du Tuan Dat and Mr. Amandeep Singh. Du Tuan is from Vabiotech in Vietnam, and Amandeep is from is an ADB consultant looking at vaccine financing. And they're going to give a presentation on the vaccine development process in Vietnam. Over to you, Amandeep and Du Tuan.
Thank you, Brian. I'm just trying to share my screen. Hello, everybody. Thanks, Brian, again. My name is Aman Singh, and Dr. Dat, who is the former president for Vabiotech in Vietnam. We both did this analysis late last year for ADB, and over the next 15 minutes, we'll take you over through some of the findings. We have 4 sections in the presentation. I'm going to cover the first 2. I will request Dr. Dat to go over the 3rd section, and then I will come back to discuss the strategic framework that we developed for Vietnam. I will not dive deep into what Dr. Benzon and Dr. Dinesh already spoke about in terms of what COVID-19 exposed in terms of the availability of the vaccines, but going further into the study, I just wanted to, I think it's important that we understand the context and the scope of the health security in Vietnam for this analysis. Vietnam, in addition to a general threat posed by an unknown pandemic, also faces a unique threat as it's a hotspot for influenza virus evolution. The government is also very determined to work toward vaccine self-reliance with new vaccines planned for the next decade. So therefore, the context of health security used in this analysis in Vietnam encompasses both known and unknown vaccine preventable diseases with pandemic potential. Vietnam's National Expanded Program on Immunization, or EPI in short form, launched in 1985 with just 6 vaccines. By 2022, it had expanded to 14 vaccines, protecting against 11 major diseases nationwide. Domestic manufacturers, which Vietnam have 4, they supply all except 2 vaccines, pentavalent and IPV, for the national EPI program. In the last decade, several key political declarations are driving the development of the domestic vaccine industry in Vietnam. For example, the Decision 68 in 2014 aimed to meet full domestic vaccine demand by 2020. Recent decisions like 1286 and Resolution 104 set the targets for producing 15 vaccines by 2030 and introducing new vaccines, including Rota, HPV, PCV, and seasonal flu. However, the progress on these political declarations, I would say, remains mixed, to say the best. First, on domestic vaccine manufacturing, there has been no clear action or concrete plans to strengthen the local production in line with the political commitments. As for new vaccines, Rota and seasonal influenza vaccines are produced domestically, but PCV and HPV vaccines are not yet part of any local production plans in the coming years. The Rota vaccine, originally planned for 2022, was being introduced at the end of last year with Gavi's support. It's going to be initially imported, but will transition to domestic sourcing in the future. However, there has been some progress when it comes to the financing estimates. The government, with support from UNICEF, had prepared some budget estimates for 2023 to 2030, and this analysis extended it to an estimate for 2040. And very briefly, in year 2040, at 2023 unit prices, Vietnam will require to spend more than $50 million for just these 4 vaccines, 2 of which are assumed to be imported and not domestically produced. Seasonal influenza vaccine formed the bulk of this budget estimate. And it's also important to highlight that Vietnam already transitioned out of Gavi support in 2020 and is currently a middle-income support country. I will hand this section over to Dr. Dat.
Okay, for next one, I talk about that kind of domestic manufacturer in Vietnam. We have kind of long history for local supply the vaccine from the kind of our vaccine manufacturer, local vaccine manufacturer. Right now, we have 4 state-owned vaccine manufacturers in Vietnam: it's IVAC, Polivac, Biotech, and Davac. Of kind of their vaccine manufacturer has total capacity about the 14 million doses for 13 vaccine. In the kind of 1993, the consumption is around the 32 million doses. Is that 81% of the vaccine in volume is for EPI. Is that the kind of our first strategy? You could self-supply the vaccine for our local market and also for the public market EPI in Vietnam. In the red, we need to use a kind of on that kind of vaccine should be used from the private sector for free or service or public health facility. Right now, from the kind of COVID pandemic, we can enjoy by 2 new that kind of private company in Vin Biocare and also Lanozins. And right now, Vin Biocare, they have set the operation. And is that you can see the kind of total number of the vaccine we produce and also supply in Vietnam by different capacity, and also that kind of used for EPI is the blue color, and also is that for private sector or service we can you can see like the kind of orange color on that one. The kind of domestic manufacturer, we have the capacity, we have the kind of R&D portfolio for vaccine, is that kind of number we have on 2023. We can see the kind of biotech normal of vaccine we have is that kind of inactivated vaccine, and also is that kind of subunit vaccine. For subunit vaccine, we have about the hepatitis B vaccine, like we follow the new technology, is that the VLP vaccine for HPV, we can produce from that one. We can see that kind of annual capacity should be about the 20 million doses, but however, for EPI, I need 2 or 2.5 million doses per year only. Is that mean I need 10% of capacity we can use only for that one. For the other vaccine like hepatitis A, JE, or maybe orange cholera is on for the hep A, JE, we have the kind of good capacity and can adapt for all the kind of demand from our market. For that kind of orange cholera, we can up to 8 million doses, but only 1.5 million doses we can use for private sector only. For that biotech, we should have some kind of vaccine for on the portfolio, like the JE and hip conjugate vaccine. For IVAC, almost the kind of bacterial vaccine or inactivated vaccine as well. But the capacity very high, but the kind of EPI should use not much as possible for that one. And for IVAC, we can develop the kind of new vaccine like pandemic flu as well. But however, the kind of vaccine could not enter to EPI or the not good for the private market as well. For Polivac, they can have the kind almost of line alternative vaccine for OPV, measles, MR, and also Rota. Rota, as kind of Aman had talked about that kind of, we try to enter Rota to EPI, but not yet good. Okay, for the next slide, please. Can you give to the next slide, please? You can see the kind of current capacities that I talk about, and also is that the kind of value chain step for R&D vaccine in Vietnam. We form the kind of legacy and routine vaccine, new or expanding vaccine, and endemic vaccine, outbreak vaccine, and also novel vaccine. Novel vaccine, it should be the kind of vaccine is for new technology we need in the future. For almost is that kind of vaccine from polio in Vietnam, we should start from the kind of beginning for R&D and also production, for API production and also filling and finishing. And however, the own kind of vaccines that only kind of space of monovalent vaccine only. For our country, we could not have the kind of good capacity for that kind of preclinical research. Or critical research we have, and we have the kind of critical research data for almost that kind of vaccine we develop. For Rota, we can develop right now, but the capacity not meet due to the high demand of Vietnam for EPI yet. For endemic, we can have the Japanese encephalitis, and that vaccine we will control well the kind of outbreak in Vietnam. For that kind of endemic outbreak, we have also seasonal vaccine and cholera vaccine for that one. For COVID, is that we have the filling and finishing only. It's not all from API yet. Last one. Okay, is that the current capacity among the Vietnamese vaccine manufacturer by platform? You can see the almost is that we should go for the traditional and classical platform, from the guideline attenuated vaccine, kin, or inactivated vaccine. For the kind of model vaccine, we can have the kind of toxoid vaccine is that like is not kind of model yet. However, is that kind of a subunit vaccine for that one. And for subunit, Biotech have the hepatitis B vaccine. We can follow the kind of new model vaccine. For Ladogen, they developed the kind of subunit vaccine for COVID as well. For next generation, right now, we could have the kind of mRNA vaccine technology from Polivac. They can get into the hub of WHO hub for mRNA vaccine country development, and also the VinBioCare on the COVID pandemics. They developed the kind of RNA vaccine from the technology from US, but right now they had the stop that kind of project. For viral vector vaccine, Biotech and IVAC also developed based on the kind of bacular virus and Newcastle virus. And also the kind we have the VLP vaccine for Biotech developed for hepatitis B vaccine. And and also the IVAC developed some kind of influenza vaccine as well. Okay. Okay, I think that's the only kind of information I can talk about the local manufacturer in Vietnam. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Dat. If I just have to add a little conclusion at the end of Dr. Dat's session, is that the domestic manufacturers in Vietnam are very strong suppliers of the domestic need for the EPI, except for a couple of vaccines. However, the industry is strongly rooted in monovalent vaccines or vaccines that are based on traditional platforms. And I think they are facing a moment when they're looking how they can actually jump over to the new, modern, novel, advanced technologies when it comes to vaccine development and manufacturing. Now, going to the last section. In this part, I would like to take you through the strategic framework that we developed, focusing on 5 key areas, each of which addresses the unique challenges and opportunities for strengthening Vietnam's vaccine development and manufacturing industry. Over the next few slides, I'll walk through each of these areas in some level of detail. The first pillar is the strategic prioritization based on manufacturing complexity, demand, and supply constraints. And on this slide, we break it down into three key factors. First is the feasibility. More complex vaccines tend to be more profitable. But as Dr. Dutt said, it's important to acknowledge the current capabilities existing in the vaccine industry of Vietnam. Next is the demand for existing vaccines from Vietnam. Low volume domestic sales would struggle to turn itself economically viable and invest profits in expanding capacities. The ASEAN region, however, presents a substantial market for some of the vaccines from Vietnam in order to achieve economies of scale and invest those profits back into their business for sustainability. Finally, the global supply constraints for the vaccines from Vietnam. For many vaccines, the market is actually saturated with low prices and many suppliers, as indicated by this graph, by this illustration on vaccine procurement by Gavi from a couple of years ago. However, some gaps do exist. For example, the cholera vaccine presenting opportunities for Vietnam to fill those gaps. And there are some gaps in rota and measles and rubella as well. Now, this balance of complexity, demand, and supply can guide which vaccines from Vietnam could be prioritized to build a sustainable manufacturing base in the long term. This slide builds on the previous slide. The chart here maps these vaccines based on the market size, supply constraints, and production viability, helping guide the strategic prioritization for future investments. In the short to medium term, very briefly, Vietnam's focus can remain on producing and expanding the business of monovalent vaccines with high demand and supply gaps, such as cholera by Vabiotech, measles, rubella, and rotavirus vaccines by Polyvac. These present clear opportunities for immediate growth if Vietnam manufacturers can manage to expand overseas. However, in the medium to long term, the goal should also be to expand into more complex multivalent vaccines and novel platforms such as HPV and PCV and modern mRNA-based vaccines. This strategy will position Vietnam to meet the future demand of these vaccines, but also allow itself to remain self-reliant in the situation of outbreaks and its regular vaccine needs. The second factor is the market access. Now, confirmed access to the market is a basic requirement to achieve a sustainable vaccine manufacturing footprint. For example, the procurement commitments directly from other country governments or indirectly via global vaccine procurement agencies like Gavi, UNICEF, have been crucial in supporting the growth of the vaccine industry in India and China in the last 30 to 40 years. There are other examples, like in the ASEAN region, Indonesia has used such mechanisms to export their locally manufactured oral polio vaccine via Gavi. Similarly, on similar lines, for Vietnamese manufacturers, predictable pool procurement volumes could significantly reduce manufacturing risks. So exploring pool mechanisms such as advanced purchase agreements and push mechanisms like research grants and tax credits will be essential for accessing the financing and ensuring market stability. It's important to highlight here that in the context of ASEAN region, many countries have or are phasing out of vaccine procurement support provided by Gavi. Therefore, the direct commitments of ASEAN governments to procure regionally manufactured vaccines will be critical, but it might not be that easy. And in the absence of such commitments, a new and innovative regional mechanism could be explored. And one such regional initiative that my ADB colleagues shared earlier has been the Asia Pacific Vaccine Access Facility, APVAC in short, focused on COVID-19 vaccine procurement. While APVAC didn't directly finance vaccine R&D, the pooled purchasing effort at a regional level helped provide a guaranteed market for new vaccines. Moving on to the third factor, which is on the capabilities required in the context of a threat of a pandemic. As defined at the start of this presentation, the risk of a pandemic from a seasonal influenza strain is highly relevant for Vietnam compared to other countries, in addition to the general threat of an unknown pandemic. The decision to include the vaccine for it in the national EPI schedule by 2030 is a step forward, but current production capacity is highly limited for influenza vaccine production. Expanding this capacity is crucial for enabling a rapid shift to pandemic vaccine production when necessary. And for it to happen, investing in modern vaccine platforms such as mRNA and viral vectors is essential. for rapid response capabilities. These platforms have proven their ability to quickly scale up production during outbreaks, as we saw in COVID-19. Vietnamese manufacturers also hold substantial experience in tech transfer or product development partnerships since the 1960s, and many of the vaccines are actually the result of such partnerships. The vaccine shown on the table below is a result of such efforts. There are more examples if you go further into the past, but this table only lists the vaccines that were developed as part of the partnerships in the last 20 years or so. However, there has been a constant theme in such partnerships that no sustainable R&D capacity or capability has been developed that could help the companies to embark on a sustainable shift to modern or novel technology platforms. These partnerships were still rooted in traditional platforms. For vaccines like HPV and PCV that are currently not manufactured locally, such partnerships will be essential for self-reliance and business opportunities in ASEAN and overseas and other overseas markets. To address pandemic threats, again, partnerships for novel platforms such as mRNA and viral vectors are also crucial. Building these collaborations will enhance Vietnam's vaccine manufacturing capabilities and ensure preparedness and self-reliance for future needs. Now, lastly, the local ecosystem needs to enable this shift. And there are three key factors important in this space. The first is the clarity and commitment from the Vietnam government on domestic purchasing. In Vietnam, manufacturers are always a bit uncertain if and when the vaccines will be procured. The mechanisms are not fixed or clear. The prices haven't changed since 2008. And it's critical that the government signals the local demand strongly and potentially in the long term. That could act as an incentive to invest in the capabilities for future vaccines. Longer-term purchase agreements could also be instrumental in attracting global partners and incentivizing partnerships. Second is the capacity of the Vietnam National Regulatory Agency, which is very important. And my colleagues already spoke about it a bit, so I'll keep it brief. But in order to export, it's almost certain that domestic manufacturers receive WHO certification for their vaccines. For example, if Gavi has to procure vaccines from Vietnam, they will need this WHO pre-qualification. But none of the vaccines at the moment in Vietnam have the WHO PQ status. There is currently one measles rubella vaccine which is under process since 2018, but it's still in the process, and it has been 6 years, as it was until 2023. And Vietnam NRA could play a key role in expediting this process and submitting a lot of local evidence from Vietnam itself directly to WHO. However, the agency doesn't have strong, robust quality assurance mechanisms when they approve the local vaccines, and this is despite them being level 3. There are gaps in the capacity, both in terms of its function and technologies. So it ends up that these domestic companies, they have to do a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to getting the WHO PQ status. Additionally, in the context of local talent upskilling, practical learning opportunities, and capacity building due to technology transfers will address gaps in tertiary and vocational education, ensuring there's a skilled workforce for sustainability. So this is the last slide of our presentation, but it attempts to represent visually and very briefly the strategic directions for the portfolio of Vietnamese manufacturers. In short to medium term, Vietnam should focus on expanding few selected vaccines from the current portfolio in overseas markets, potentially ASEAN, but for that, they will need WHO PQ status for those vaccines and market access. In parallel, they should also start looking into new tech transfer partnerships, in particular for PCV and HPV that are planned to be launched in the coming 6 to 7 years, and build capacity in mRNA and viral vector platforms in long term for dealing with potential pandemics in the future. That's the end of our presentation. Thank you.
Wonderful. Dr. Dat Amandeep, thanks so much for the great deep dive into Vietnam's vaccine ecosystem and context. We're going to welcome Dr. Dat back to sit on our panel in a few minutes. But without any further ado, let's move quite quickly to our next presenter. Our time saved is now caught up to us. So let me please introduce Dr. Jinho Shin, our colleague at WHO Western Pacific Regional Office, who's no stranger to many of us in health. But for those online, Dr. Shin is a medical officer at WHO Western Pacific with a long history in regulatory system strengthening, central medicine and health technologies platforms. Dr. Shin has worked also on contributing to global standards for both vaccines and biologicals in many regions, and spent many decades in this area. So Dr. Shin, wonderful to have you, and over to you.
Thanks, Brian, for your kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. 안녕하세요. With yes, right, over 20 years of experience in WHO, I've had a great privilege accepting this as speaker invitation. Today, I'm excited to share some insights on the progress and challenges in regulatory system strengthening in the region, which is a subject that I'm passionate about. And I believe ADB's regulatory system strengthening initiatives that are well articulated with those WHO global regional development partners will have a significant impact on improving health and closing the health equity gaps, in particular the low resource settings. Let's dive in. So today, with the first 3 slides, I'm going to start with a few high-level points that set the tone of my talk. First, the regulatory system strengthening program in the Western Pacific region I'm leading is fully aligned with the WHO's global policy and approaches. And second, the regional program promotes the use of unified global standards for medical products to get rid of unnecessary technical barriers. So member states in the region are actually shown here in the graphic map. There will be ongoing kind of change as discussion is currently happening if Indonesia also should join a Western Pacific region. In the wake of a recent pandemic, WHO published an ecosystem approach to accelerating access to life-saving innovations. So the regulatory system strengthening is fully aligned with this overall ecosystem approach, already also well elaborated by the previous speakers. And why do we need to use a unified global standards for vaccines and other medical products? It's very much obvious. I think I don't have to emphasize this anymore. So particularly the global standards enable consistency in production, reducing the risk of substandard falsified products. They also promote equitable access to essential medicines and vaccines, in particular the low resource settings, by aligning the international efforts. So eventually contributing to protecting people from deadly diseases. So regulatory authority is playing important role. They're providing independent regulatory oversight over the development, production, marketing, and surveillance of medical products. So the regulatory authority in different countries, actually different structure, different shape. So the NRAs are usually categorized under 3 the kind of structure systems, like centralized or decentralized or discrete, depending on the country. And irrespective of the structure, regulatory authority plays a central critical role in probably 3 different points: the ensuring the quality, safety, efficacy, performance of medical products, and also overseeing the supply chain and ensuring the relevance of and the accuracy of the product information. So critical product attributes for these medical products are safety, efficacy, effectiveness, and quality. In the case of medical device, the preferred term for efficacy effectiveness will be performance. This is a little bit of difference. Currently, there is ongoing kind of revision process for a GBT tool to adjust kind of this terminology. WHO RSS program was launched earlier, 1997, with a new statement: a vaccine of non-good quality. It adopts a systems approach to NRA strengthening. So there are very important working definition what means to be a vaccine of non-good quality. So this already well defined with at that time 6 critical functions. But later on, over more than 2 decades, WHO actually redefined common, non-common regulatory functions for medicines, vaccines, blood products, and medical devices, including IVDs. So these reflect the various demand from countries and over the different product categories. So just would like to show some example of registration marketing authorization process. This process is a typical example. It involves scientific evaluation of quality, non-clinical, clinical data, GMP inspection, and sample testing. And also it involves consultation of expert advisory committee with the review report generated by the regulatory authority. And if the application is satisfactory, the NRA issue an MA certificate. Particularly the MA review time and relevance and validity of review report is important indicator to assess the level of NRA performance. The review time illustrated in this flowchart is an example. So it's probably different by product, by regulatory authority. During pandemic, enormously rapid speed, like 20 to 30 the days actually spent approving those COVID-19 vaccines. So there are some the cases actually really the fast track those process. And this is an example of market surveillance control. So this process involves multifaceted approach regarding coordination among various regulatory functions. It begins with the risk-based surveillance planning to identify potential safety issues in marketed product. And this is followed by systematic inspections to ensure compliance with safety, quality standards, and regulations. Concurrently, laboratory testing is conducted to verify product quality and safety. In case as a product is identified, recall, disposal, rapid alert notification should be followed. And importantly, effective communication, collaboration among regulatory agencies, manufacturers, stakeholders are crucial throughout the process to promptly identify risk, take corrective actions, and safeguard the public health. So currently there is ongoing global effort to improve traceability by implementing global standard, one standard, which helps prevent falsified substance medicines from reaching the patients. There are some the standardized definition and the tools actually incorporated. So move on to what outcomes impact does the NRA want to achieve? The general concept of regulatory system include 3 components: a regulatory framework, such as laws, regulations, standards, and resources, and also regulatory institutions. The impact regulatory system want to achieve could be improved access to safe, effective, quality assured medical product, less incidence of SF product on the market, increase pharmaceutical sector's contribution to the country's economic revenues. So the regulatory impact can be achieved through increased compliance with regulatory requirements by the external stakeholders under regulation. So what are these terms? Benchmarking, WLA, already introduced, mentioned by a number of speakers. So GBT is a tool to objectively evaluate the regulatory systems for medicine, vaccine, blood products, medical devices. And the evaluation is a voluntary process. And it begins with the expression of interest from the member states. The tool has a total of 268 sub-indicators to assess regulatory system functions. And final result of the assessments is graded into 4 performance maturity level, level 1, 2, or 3, or 4. So the basically this follows the ISO 9004 standard, and the ML3 is a target of WHO resolution. For vaccine regulation, it's an eligibility criterion for a manufacturer to apply for WHO pre-qualification that is intended to supply to the UN market. I think this is tremendously important because any vaccines manufactured, even the largest country like China, India, domestic supply doesn't provides, I think, a full-fledged kind of economic benefit. So the global market, it will be important, and this maturity level should be considered in overall strengthening of local manufacturing and also the regulatory system strengthening. So there is WHO recently introduced a WHO least authority concept, replacing the stringent regulatory authority based upon the comments receiving from public consultation. So the main aim of WLA is threefold: to provide more transparent, robust, equitable measures of regulatory performance and optimize the use of limited resources by facilitating reliance, and to promote access to the supply of safe, effective, quality medical products. So WLA designation process is distinct from GBT process, and it builds on GBT process, but there is a separate performance evaluation tool which are publicly available. The final decision process involves deliberations of WLA Technical Advisory Group comprised of 15 expert members from all WHO regions. So first WLA was announced that includes Singapore, Republic of Korea, and Switzerland. And another 33 new WLAs were announced this year. Actually, 3 from 31 countries and 2 additional kind of regional regulatory authorities. So the total currently 36 WLAs. And is there regional cooperation, collaboration mechanism among NRAs and partners in the region? The snapshot shows the current status of medicine vaccine production, national control laboratories for medicine vaccine in the Western Pacific. There are 14 medicine producing countries, 6 vaccine producing countries in the region. As of now, 4 countries supply vaccines to the UN market through WHO pre-qualification program. They are Australia, China, Japan, and Republic of Korea. So 1 vaccine product from Vietnam is under evaluation at this time by WHO pre-qualification. And the strengthening the regulatory system in the region involves the Western Pacific Regional Alliance of NRAs for medical products. The WEPRA focuses on fostering cooperation, convergence, harmonization among national regulatory authorities in the region. They focus on capacity gap assessment through benchmarking, enhancing country regulatory capacity through technical support, and aligning regulatory practice to international standards, sharing policy and tools to address regulatory preparedness response to public health emergency. WEPRA was formally launched in 2013 after a few years of dialogue among pioneer members. And WEPRA is voluntary cooperation mechanism. All participant members meet once a year, and the steering committee meets twice a year to provide leadership role in developing, implementing strategic plan. And this slide shows the key milestone of national regulatory system benchmarking in the Western Pacific region since the formal endorsement by member states in 2013 for those forming WEPRA network. And this slide shows the summary of key milestone, achievements of regulatory systems in the region. The one point I'd like to make here, the last year, the Philippines, Malaysia hosted formal benchmarking event, and currently both countries are addressing those recommended actions to fulfill the requirement. And what are the current efforts to close equity gaps in improving the access to vaccines through local production in low-risk settings? So I prepared 4 slides to walk you through the current efforts to close equity gaps in improving access. So particularly one aspect is the WHO mRNA R&D consortia and Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific. So the table illustrates the effort currently ongoing with the partners in Southeast Asia and Western Pacific that actually they include some of the R&D consortia to develop mRNA vaccines against hand, foot, and mouth disease, therapeutic human papillomavirus vaccine, dengue vaccine, and Plasmodium vivax vaccine. And the TT partners from Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Vietnam are participating in this consortia. And those challenges are very much similar to those previously introduced by other colleagues, particularly Dr. Amandi. And probably I want to skip this one. And importantly, I'd like to mention this global training hub for biomanufacturing. So this is, I think, important the activity that is also a mechanism to enhance our collaboration with government leadership and the partners. And last one, I'd like to mention is strengthening clinical trials. The member states WHO adopted the WHO resolution strengthening clinical trials to provide high quality evidence on health, because during COVID-19 there was a greater demand the data generated locally, so that it actually provide local health problems solution and enhance local problem solving capacity and identify priority actions and implementing this WHO kind of resolution. Sorry, just this is the last slide. In summary, this is overarching kind of summary. As I'm moving forward, it will be crucial to strengthen partnership between government, international organizations, and private sector. So this will ensure making available resources, technical support, infrastructure to boost local manufacturing, appropriate oversight by competent regulatory authorities. So thank you for your kind attention. I'm happy to take any question, discuss further how we can enhance our collaboration to support priority countries in regulatory system strengthening. Over. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dr. Shin. Fantastic and deep overview of the regulatory strengthening systems in the Western Pacific and elsewhere. So we'll welcome you back, Dr. Shin, to participate on our discussion panel to offer some further insights. And again, if I can encourage everyone online, if they have any questions for our panelists or any questions on the presentation, please do pop them in the chat with your organisation name, and we'll aim to address them in our discussion section. So rounding out the last formal presentation part of the webinar today are our colleagues from Accenture, who graciously, in partnership with us, really conducted some of the formative research on the Bangladesh policy briefs, which really underpins some of the thinking around hosting this webinar. And they've also done some key work in partnership with ADB on vaccine platform and market sizing in the region. So without any further ado, I'll introduce Ms. Ragini Alawalia from Accenture, team lead, and Mr. Varun Sivastava, from Accenture to give us an overview of some of the work you've done in partnership with ADB. Varun, Ragini, over to you.
Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you to the ADB team for giving us this opportunity to share our learnings. I'm Ragini, joined in by my colleague Varun, and we are thrilled to be here today to speak with you all. And please do bear with us if we move a little quickly. We promise to try to make time, but there is a lot to share and far deeper insights. We'd be most happy to discuss any questions or deeper insights on our analyses with any of you post this session. So moving ahead, we are here to talk to you today about two aspects of the studies that we conducted with ADB from December 2022 to August 2023. We'll cover high-level insights across each. The first, which I'll be covering, is focused on the nucleic acid landscape and market assessment. And the second, which will be covered by Varun, is focused on policy recommendations for vaccine manufacturing in Bangladesh. So moving ahead, a bit more context on this study. This stemmed from the time of COVID-19, when challenges with health security and availability or accessibility of vaccines and therapeutics in the Asia and the Pacific region was strongly brought to light. At the same time, during this time, mRNA and DNA vaccines, which are nucleic acid-based vaccines, were pushed into the spotlight, which left a need to have a better understanding of these technologies and whether they hold potential for this region. This prompted ADB to bring on Accenture for two objectives for the assessment, which was one, to conduct a landscaping of the nucleic acid-based technologies that are in current use and in pipelines, prioritize the ones with high potential and provide deep dives on those. And the second was to forecast and estimate the future demand and market potential of the prioritized technologies across ADB's DMCs. I'd just like to note that this analysis was conducted between December 2022 and April 2023. So the data that we'll be talking about largely pertains to what was available at that point in time. So we started with a rapid review of the 5 nucleic acid technologies that you see here. That includes ASOs, DNA plasmids, siRNA, mRNA, and aptamers. The ones that are highlighted in purple that you see are the ones that were prioritized based on their potential for public health and disease impact and the robustness of their current pipelines. So particularly mRNA emerged as a frontrunner given the highest number of marketed or pipeline products and the indication coverage. We observed this to be a versatile platform that can be adapted and customized widely. It was strongly mobilized through COVID-19 as well as promising trials for other infectious diseases. But the future disease scope for this technology is also quite wide, expected to grow into cancer and cardiovascular diseases. DNA plasmids also gained recent traction, and they're considered safe, cost-effective, and stable at room temperatures, which are huge advantages. The first ever vaccine of this kind for human use received approval in India for COVID-19 in 2021. And the pipeline is catering to a broad set of indications extending to both infectious as well as non-communicable indications such as cancer. And siRNA, or small interfering RNA, shows immense promise for targeted treatment across infectious, genetic, cancers, and cardiometabolic diseases. Several therapies have been approved or are in clinical development. And particularly in the Asia-Pacific region, there was a surge in R&D that we observed, notably in countries like China, Japan, and South Korea. Our report provides very detailed insights on these technologies, their current usage, the market dynamics, and the future outlook, and is all available for your reference. But moving on to our forecast, we considered marketed and pipeline products that are available globally and leveraged country-level data for addressable populations for the indications and diseases that we were considering. We projected adoption rates by considering factors such as launch timelines, approval probability, the trial phases, and others. And we also applied pricing estimates to determine the market sizes across countries and across a few scenarios that you see here. But at an aggregate level for Asia-Pacific, in the base or moderate case scenario, our model forecasted a total market size of $10.7 billion by 2035 for the 3 nucleic acid technologies. And while there are several detailed insights available on these forecasts, it's notable to see that Overall, these technologies have a positive outlook and an exponential growth rate, but mRNA is the one that holds the most potential as per our analysis at 6.4 billion by 2035, followed by siRNA at 3.8 billion and DNA plasmids at 0.5 billion by 2035. And double-clicking into the forecast, our analysis was divided into 3 further categories: prophylactic vaccines, therapeutic vaccines, and therapeutics. The market growth was seen to be initially driven by prophylactic vaccines, post-2026 consisting of declining revenues from COVID-19 vaccines and increasing revenues from launches for other infectious diseases. In fact, post our analysis, of course, in May 2024, Moderna received FDA approval for a new mRNA-based vaccine for RSV. And post-2030, our analysis suggested that product launches in therapeutic vaccines, which cover genital herpes, HPV, and others, and therapeutics, which would cover multiple cancers and hepatitis, were expected to gain prominence, and by 2035 could comprise over 80% of the entire market share. And since our analysis was country-based, we also have insights on the market sizes and technology potential across countries. We've developed a dashboard which is available for ADB and DMCs to use, visualize, and analyze the country-wise insights. And lastly, this landscape, as we can see, does show promising applications and potential in Asia Pacific. There are unique benefits offered across the 3 technologies in the short, medium, and long term, and across disease contexts. But that said, this landscape is evolving rapidly. And while the potential shown by these technologies is clear, it's important to note that traditional methods will remain the primary choice, as was also discussed in the previous presentations, at least in the foreseeable future, for countries to meet their needs. And countries will likely need to, in the future, rely on a portfolio of technologies as they look towards their health security goals. And hence, as part of our recommendations, we have suggested that countries carefully deliberate their investments and selection of technologies, taking into account their objectives, existing capabilities, future needs, and a framework for doing so is also available for us in our report for reference. With that, I'll quickly hand this over to Varun to talk through the policy briefs that we developed.
Thank you so much, Ragini. Could we go to the next slide, please? Great. So as many of the speakers, including Dr. Dinesh, spoke about, the challenge during the pandemic of inequitable access to vaccines was seen. Countries which had domestic manufacturing capabilities fared better. They were able to ensure speedier access to a larger share of their population. And also Bangladesh, due to its economic and social progress, is transitioning out of the LDC list and also out of Gavi support by 2029. So within this context, to help Bangladesh attract the investment it needed to scale up vaccine manufacturing in the country, we looked at 3 priority areas in order to identify recommendations. The 3 areas were creating an enabling environment for vaccine manufacturing, strengthening the clinical trial ecosystem, and finally, regulatory upgradation. In this presentation, I'll talk about all 3 in a brief manner. Could you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so if we talk about vaccine manufacturing, Bangladesh already produces vaccines, which are used presently in the national API, and it also has a thriving pharmaceutical industry. We assess the 6 key components needed for a well-functioning manufacturing ecosystem for vaccines. We found that despite recent action through an IP law which was mandated in 2022, mechanisms for know-how protection and easy dispute settlement were needed, because that's one of the key things that multinational pharmaceuticals highlighted that is something they seek in their target markets. Then investments and partnerships were needed to develop a skilled workforce which is capable of production of large biomolecules. In the short term, this could be achieved through external support for technology and know-how transfer and through facilitating this by easing, let's say, onboarding of expats and so on. Over the longer term, this could be done through partnerships with pharmaceuticals, and there are private pharmaceuticals which produce vaccines even currently, and also through establishment of training courses, academies, and partnerships with existing training facilities and institutes which are available globally. Another thing that multinationals look at while assessing potential for tech transfers is the overall market size and the likelihood of success for them to achieve the potential post-investment. One of the things that we've recommended as a part of this analysis is demand guarantees and investments in accurate demand forecasting with working with manufacturers, while at the same time establishing mechanisms for preventing parallel imports, because that is another key issue that pharmaceuticals look to avoid when they identify countries for tech transfers. Okay, on the regulatory end, we identified how creating prioritized approval processes for locally manufactured and developed products, along with harmonizing the regulatory requirements, could help streamline the overall process. On the trade side, we looked at the current tariffs in place, and Bangladesh seemingly had some of the highest tariffs for vaccines in the region, and also not some, but not significant non-tariff measures. We've recommended establishing mechanisms for coordination between customs and other agencies, along with creating policies to avoid export restrictions while also reducing tariffs. Finally, over the longer term, measures like creating an incentive framework to promote tech transfers and production, such as production-linked incentives, etc., could help the overall ecosystem as well. Could we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so for to develop and then market vaccines beyond just production, we also need a thriving domestic clinical trials industry and landscape, which is also supported by a strong and well-capacitated regulator. Presently, in terms of clinical trials, Bangladesh has some but limited clinical trial activity, which is concentrated at a few sites and does not have a significant industry participation. So it's primarily government-led, and also the number and types of products and indications which are targeted are limited as well, primarily limited to diarrheal diseases and so on at ICDDRB, which is one of the world-class sites which is available. The availability of CROs is also limited, and the clinical trial infrastructure is limited as well. And partnerships with the global clinical trial networks are few. So with this context, we looked at what Bangladesh could prioritize going forward. We recommended changes across the components of a well-functioning clinical trials ecosystem, similar to the vaccine ecosystem, and also looked at the global and regional best practices so that we could benchmark and identify those pathways where countries have already done it, taken similar steps and forwarded their agenda in terms of strengthening clinical trials. So for approval timelines and processes overall, we saw that there were delays due to there being a lack of parallel ethics and regulatory reviews, which is one of the key interventions that we recommended, along with single window clearance mechanisms and adoption of electronic platforms and applications for registration and monitoring. On the infra and capacity front, we identified that there was a need for establishment of new clinical trial sites, investments in laboratories and equipment, tying in with the broader health system strengthening efforts. Also, we identified a need for establishment of a pool of principal investigators, which could be tapped into through a centralized manner to identify and then operate clinical trials. Partnering with international clinical trial networks is also something that we identified as a high potential, high impact intervention. And of course, all of this must be underpinned by capacity building of both the regulator and all of the clinical trial participants, which will include the health workforce, the investigators, and so on. On the data and system side, so there is the key need for not just implementing, but also driving uptake of an electronic clinical trial registry. But along with that, there is an identified need for data privacy and protection laws and policies, which can potentially help assuage the concerns of participants. And finally, private sector participation is crucial. So any incentives that can be provided to global and regional CROs could really help in promoting the clinical trial ecosystem and the way it operates in Bangladesh. If we go to the next slide, unfortunately, while we don't have enough time to go through all of this.
Actually, I might jump in here, Varun, please, because we're running very, very short of time due to wind up at 3:30. Which only leaves us just a few minutes for the panel discussion. But we will share the slides.
Sure.
Yeah, and thanks for that. Sorry, time's caught up with us. Unfortunately, we had started out well, and now we're tight. So we want to bring on some special guests, really to seek some insights, and if we can bring back our presenters and panelists. But I will introduce Ms. Nilgan Erdogan, who's the regional manager for Gavi, the Vaccine Institute for Bangladesh and in the region, and a long colleague of ours, of mine. So welcome, Nilgan, to offer some insights. And I'll also bring back Dr. Benjamin Coghlan, former health security specialist, senior health security specialist with the ADB, medical physician and epidemiologist extraordinaire, who has been with the ADB for a long time, and in particular with the vaccines work that ADB is conducting. So welcome, Ben, to the panel. And if I may bring back Dr. Shin, Dr. Dat, and Regini from Accenture. And for any questions that are posted in our chat, we will put them to the panelists. But if I may we're looking at some of the implementation challenges and reflections of our panelists. So if I may throw for 1 to 2 minutes to Nilgan first from the Gavi perspective on what some challenges, barriers might be to strengthening the vaccine ecosystem. Over to you, Nilgan.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting also Gavi into this discussion. So as you know, Gavi is not necessarily a technical agency like WHO, or even parts of ADB where there is more in-depth analysis, especially on the vaccine production. However, we do work in the market and the market space. What I wanted to talk about is currently I'm working on Bangladesh portfolio. I'd like to talk about Bangladesh and what we are doing in Bangladesh, and I'll be very quick. So Bangladesh is a historically very well-performing national immunization program. They have been doing so well, very high coverage rates, and they have been very active vaccine adopters, new vaccine adopters, new technology adopters. So there's a lot of, government interest into the immunization program, as well as, the technologies that are related to that. So they have been implementing HIP-containing pentavalent. They are early adopters of PCV vaccine and IPV. And actually, in fact, today they are introducing the second phase of HPV vaccine. So it's today, actually, they are doing it. So today is the start day. And they have been very, very successful in order to, not only to their own national program, but they are also including all the vaccines for the refugee populations that they are hosting as well. And as Gavi, we have been supporting them in both for the immunization program, national immunization program, but as well as the refugees that they are hosting from Myanmar. So with that, they are also, in the coming years, they will be doing a lot of campaign, starting with cholera vaccine for preventive purposes, as well as MR for campaign. again, for prevention and to make sure that they stay on the measles elimination roadmap. And they will be introducing TCV and then Japanese encephalitis. These are all approved vaccines at the moment that are in the pipeline. So our investments, both in terms of cash and cash support, that introduction of the vaccines as well as the TA, that will be continuing in the coming years. Despite the fact that they are accelerated transition country, they will be moving out of Gavi support by 2029. There is still quite interest and investment for Bangladesh from Gavi side in the coming years. Right now, we have about, apart from the vaccines, we have currently we have over 100 million in the pipeline, $100 million in the pipeline for them to work on their health systems, work on providing of different types of TCA, and we still have some ongoing COVID support, which we will invest towards system support. And we have also what we call an equity and accelerated funds that again that works towards increasing number of children that are immunized, particularly targeting unimmunized children or under-immunized children. So these supports, they still will continue in the coming year for Bangladesh. In the accelerated transition, we are open to provide support in collaboration with our alliance partners towards system support, again, particularly what we have talked here around the NRA support or support around licensing, etc. I mean, they are not going to be big amounts, but definitely there will be support around that to prepare them for the future in terms of the vaccine manufacturing. So those are the areas that we will be able to support them. And other areas that are identified. I think going forward, one of the areas that, based on our experience from the transitioning countries, the area that the countries suffer or struggle the most is the government's lack of funding for the operational costs to keep the sustainability of the program, national immunization program, but also the service provision that goes with it. And that's usually not costed, not considered in the government analysis or in the planning for the future. I think that's something that we have seen it over and over again in regions like PAHO or in Euro. I mean, there has been some advancement made, but there's still a lot of reliance to external support for the operational aspects of any kind of program. So that is something I think worth highlighting, even in the in the environment of the vaccine manufacturing. Even in the vaccine manufacturing country. So I think that's something that needs to be taken on because operational costs are usually much higher than any other costs. And that's something that I wanted to highlight. In terms of the regional vaccine manufacturing, I think PAHO is a very good example. There are a lot of lessons to be learned from that. It is quite a long endeavor. They worked decades to come to, a region-wide conclusion, having a national, having a regional agreed immunization program, products, and then, of course, going forward with the procurement. So it's quite a big endeavor to have this regional kind of capacity, but I think it would be beneficial for Asia. And if that happens, and in terms of our region, of course, Gavi would like to play a role. I think I will stop here and answer any questions.
Wonderful. Thanks, Nilgün, so much. And I see from our Q&A button at the bottom of everybody's screen, there's a thriving chat. And I thank panelists for particularly and efficiently responding to everybody's Q&A as we go. Ben, can I throw to you for some additional reflections from the ADB's perspective in your work? Over to you.
Sure, thanks, Brian. Yeah, I'll be really quick because I think we're over time. But Dinesh started out this, and Dodo started out this this webinar talking about a really exciting portfolio of work for us. But really, prior to the pandemic, we had no footprint in this space at all. So I think our learnings really are that, we are one of many partners involved in responding in this space. So a comprehensive assessment and understanding of what is required to build vaccine security for therapeutics and other medical countermeasures is something we all need to reflect, and what is our role in this. So I think that's important. And the upcoming World Bio Summit in Republic of Korea in a couple of weeks, I think, has been a key forum for us to sort of get together and map out, how we all play together. The other thing I think is that, we've talked a lot about regional approaches to this, but they are quite hard to stitch up. And the first thing, really the first priority for us is that regional approaches won't work without strong national systems, strong, native manufacturing systems, strong regulators, as Dr. Shin sort of outlined. So our key partners are the developing member countries, and many of our actions here on regulation, on manufacturing, are leveraging what we did in COVID to strengthen systems in key countries to amplify the total manufacturing capability of our region, right, and make us more self-reliant. So, and building on that, we can strengthen these connections between regulators, and Dinesh outlined a few mechanisms we're doing that, connections for the manufacturers, and we're trying to build this alumni of, 90-odd people trained out of Yonsei University in Korea, but also connections with private industry. They previously were not very active conversationalists with national regulators or with development banks. And I think that's turned now with the pandemic. And we should leverage that interest to build systems that work for private enterprise and for national governments. And the last thing there, I think, is to recognize the linkages when we're working across our own health portfolio. So we're chatting to industry about reducing carbon emissions from production of the medical supply chain. And that's an entree point here into discussing regulation and other aspects that have been part of this webinar today. Thanks, Brian.
Okay, thanks, Ben. What I might offer, I'm getting messages that we're now 10 minutes overdue, and we must have a hard close in the next 2 minutes. So might I ask if Dr. Shin, if any last queries or remarks, reflections that you might have?
Oh, thank you, Brian. Just you put me in a hot spot. But yeah, I just really appreciate this opportunity. All I think partners to discuss the particularly country support, and I'm very, very glad that the ADB put this regulatory system strengthening in priority kind of action in this agenda, initiative, and it's also addressed as equity issue that we had previously. So just very much congratulate all those speakers participating and organizers from ADB and all audience participating this the event. Thank you very much. Over to you, Brian.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Shin. Now, I'm sorry, Dr. Dutt, Ragini, Varun, we must go to closing remarks. But what I might say for anybody on the call, and we still have a number of people, to pose your questions either to me directly, and I'll forward them and connect you with Ragini, Varun, and Dr. Dutt and Amandeep. And we must go to closing remarks. So if I may, folks, I'll call on my colleague, Alexo Esperanto, to pop in and bring us to a close. Thanks, Alexo, for the time today. Alexo, you're muted.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I was muted indeed. Yes, thank you, Brian, and everyone for this wonderful webinar. As closing remarks, I just wanted to mention ADB's unwavering commitment to help countries achieve vaccine self-sufficiency, right? We're all aware that this is fundamental for countries to have robust health systems. And while global partnerships are helpful, it's also very important to help countries develop their own capacity so that they can manufacture their own vaccines. ADB has been at the forefront of these efforts through, as we all know, technical assistance, loans, and knowledge sharing. I'll just give a couple of very brief examples. We have been helpful countries such as Bangladesh, the Kyrgyz Republic, and Southeast Asian countries such as Thailand to strengthen their vaccine regulatory standards and quality controls. We have also supported through a loan, as Dinesh has discussed, Bangladesh to expand its manufacturing capacity through investment in infrastructure, technology, and human capital. We have also been advocating for equitable access to vaccines in countries such as India, the Philippines, Indonesia, and Vietnam. That includes advocating for fair pricing, transparent procurement, and prioritization of essential vaccines, as well as regional cooperation efforts through the Greater Mekong Sub-Region Health Cooperation, where countries are able to share expertise and best practices with one another. So ADB will continue pushing these efforts with, again, the shared goal of vaccine self-sufficiency and reduce reliance on imports, actually. So I would like to thank all of our distinguished speakers and panelists, also Brian for the wonderful moderation, and also to all assistants for staying with us today and staying over time. We'll be looking forward to engaging with you in future webinars. The next one will focus on Japan, local performance of health systems, as well as local financing of health systems. Thank you very much.
Everybody.
Have a good day.